Welcome back. In this segment, we're going to talk a little bit about how to utilize helpful supplementary materials in your sermons. Okay, so throughout all these segments, I've given you a lot of information, a lot of thoughts on how to think about passages of Scripture, and I've given you a journey that you can sort of go on. At the end of your sermon prep, or towards the end of it, you should already have a pretty quality understanding as to where you're going. How are you going to exposit the passage? What are you going to highlight? What specific things you want to bring out? What was the author's intent? How was it understood by the original audience? How do they apply it to their lives? What things can you take from their culture to ours? What does this particular passage teach us about the person and work of Christ? The fallen condition focus. Why was this passage necessary for the peoples of that time? And what do we have in common with those people? And therefore, how does this apply to us? I want to then focus extensively on applying the Scriptures. And I even want to call out specific groups of people. All throughout this entire journey, I want to be speaking to the heart. I want to be speaking imaginatively. I want to be speaking wondrously and curiously. And I may even want to be speaking prophetically in a variety of moments. Once you've kind of put this all together, you kind of have a decent outline, a journey you're going to go through, so to speak. What you want to then do is look through all your components, look through your sermon outline, and begin to ask yourself, are there any helpful materials that I can then insert into my particular outline? Sometimes you may do that as you go. You may be realizing there's a particular thing you want to highlight, and you go, ooh, this is a great metaphor I can use here. But frequently what I find is I actually go through my outline first, and then I begin to look through it, and I begin to go piece by piece and ask myself, what thing can I add to this that will help amplify that? I begin to ask myself, what good stories can I add to this? What good metaphors can I add to this? What imagery or word pictures can I add? Are there any great illustrations? And you want to make sure you've got some good ones spread all throughout. If you notice that your outline's got 2 or 3 really good illustrations at the beginning, nothing in the middle, and maybe one okay illustration at the end, well, then you want to then spread that out and say, okay, Matt, rather than using 2 or 3 at the beginning, can I get rid of 2 of those, just use 1? Can I find 2 for the middle? That would be the thing you want to do. Don't want to jump on Google or go to different websites that may help me with different illustrations. Or what I want to do is go talk to people in my congregation and just say, hey, I'm thinking about preaching this particular idea on Sunday. Here's a 10-second recap. Here's a 1 point. You got any stories or anything you know about, anything you've heard that you think would be helpful? I want to dialogue about this with some of my friends. This is one of the reasons why I like doing sermon prep several days before I have to preach. It gives me an opportunity to kind of think about it. The other thing I frequently like to do as I'm going through the course of my life is I just note things. Whenever funny things happen or crazy moments happen in my life, when I observe things in life, I take out my phone and I kind of just jot down what happened and I save it for later. Because you never know when you may need it. What I like to do then when I'm doing sermon prep, when I'm kind of looking through my outline, I'll look through my notepad in my iPhone, and I'll look through the dozens of random things I've observed, funny moments or things that I thought could be helpful, and I look, are there any unique metaphors that I've observed or stories that I've heard that I think might be helpful to me as I go throughout my sermon prep? And what I'll typically find is that there are things that I have observed throughout the course of my life that I can then implement. I did this recently on a teaching I did from Mark chapter 8. There was a great story I heard about an actor named Kenny Baker who had almost passed up the chance to be in Star Wars. I remember hearing this story and thinking this was an incredible story that I thought, I'm going to use this in a sermon one day. I grabbed my iPhone, I jotted down the story, I saved the URL link of the website of where I had originally heard the story from, and I saved it. And several months later, I was doing a particular teaching or prepping to do a teaching, and as I was looking, I thought to myself, wow, that story that I heard about Kenny Baker will fit perfectly with this teaching I'm doing. What I'm not trying to do is just manufacture or make stuff up, but I'm looking through my outline and I'm asking myself, what are some of the stories or illustrations or images that I think would be helpful? I want to make sure that at every segment of my sermon, there's at least one quality metaphor or one quality piece of imagery. I want to make sure that they are spread out throughout my sermon. The other thing I want to make sure that I add throughout the course of my sermon is some bit of data, some bit of factual information, some statistic, or something that will be helpful in making the case. I want to make sure that I have at least one or two throughout my sermon. And the reason why is because there are certain types of people in every single audience that always want facts. They love information. And if you go through an entire sermon and you don't appease them, if you don't scratch that itch, so to speak, they won't want to listen to you. You will not be able to be an effective impact preacher in their hearts and minds. So you want to make sure that you speak to their mind, because ultimately that's how you get to their heart. It doesn't speak to everyone. Stats and facts don't speak to most people. But in every audience, there's at least some segment of people that care a lot about that. So make sure throughout your sermon you've included at least one or two stats or facts. The other thing I love to include in all of my sermons is some inspirational quote. I usually like to start with one. I usually like to have one in the middle, and I like to have one toward the end. At the end of my sermon preparation, when I look through my sermon outline, I always ask myself, do I have at least 3 really good quotes that are really inspirational? Quotes can be really, really helpful. It really helps give you this sense of credibility and authority. It's not just this particular preacher saying it, it's this other famous person I respect. And I want to make sure that when I'm quoting people, that they are different types of people. Whenever I'm quoting, if I've quoted 3 or 4 people, are they all male? Can I quote a female in there? If I'm quoting people that are all from ancient culture or from the Reformation, can I get someone who is more contemporary? Or if everyone is contemporary, can I get someone who's maybe not so contemporary? If I've quoted someone who is a Calvinist, can I work in an Arminian in there that I respect and like? If I've gotten people who are more charismatic only, can I work someone in there maybe who's not charismatic in their theology? I want to make sure that I have a diversity in my quotes. I think that's helpful to build respect and credibility with the people in your audience. Whenever you are preparing a sermon, you want to make sure you look through your entire outline and begin to ask yourself, are there things I can implement to help bolster my arguments? I want to ask myself, are there any personal stories from my own life that I can implement? In fact, every single sermon should include some personal bit of information, some story from your own life, and some element of transparency. You want to make sure that you have lots of material that are supplementary to the core, the things you're expositing from the Scripture, to help unpack, to help amplify the things you are wanting to teach. These things are extremely helpful in becoming an impact preacher. Lots of great imagery, lots of great metaphors, and stories from your own life to really show people who you are and how this passage has impacted you in some way or another. Be transparent. In the next segment, we're going to talk about the call to action. How do you call people to respond to your particular message?